Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about two horrible, and I mean horrible, German piano concertos. I'm referring to major works by Max Reger and Hans Pfitzner, the Laurel and Hardy of early German conservative romantic chromatic sludge, because that's what this piece is. Both of them, they're both chromatic sludge. Let me explain to you why they're so bad. First, let's talk about Max Reger. Now, Max Reger was in some ways a very interesting composer, and he was really a very funny guy in person. It's just that his music was dreary, unbelievably dreary. The problem with Reger wrote one of the most famous letters to a critic that I have ever seen. It's in the Lexicon of Musical Invective, by Nicholas Slonimsky. It says, I'm sitting in the smallest room of my house. I have your review before me. In a moment, it will be behind me. I mean, you gotta love the guy, right? I mean, it's totally fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous. And the most wonderful thing about this video review is that he can't say it about that. He'd have to be much more creative in finding an equivalent for that letter. Now, here's the thing. Here's the thing about Reger. Reger was essentially indifferent to the orchestral medium. He enjoyed extremely chromatic harmony, and he loved writing lots and lots of densely conceived counterpoint, and he was really not a very good orchestrator. And as a consequence, his music often sounds, his orchestral music, mind you, often sounds extremely thick and cluttered. I've heard lovely chamber works and some really charming piano music. I mean, he could write nice music, he really could. But when he had all those instruments, he had this overwhelming urge to do something with them all the time, all of them. And the result is terribly thick. Now, his piano concerto can play for a good 45 minutes. I mean, it's long and it's dense, and most importantly, as my colleague Jed Tisler pointed out, reviewing this very performance, which is quite splendid, featuring Marc-André Hamelin and the Berlin Radio Symphony Orchestra under Ilan Volkov on Hyperion, it has no tunes. I mean, it has tunes, but it has bad tunes. They're not memorable, they're not interesting, and he makes the piano work. I mean, really work for nothing. Absolutely nothing. The problem is Reger himself said that his music was too austere and too serious to be, taken, correctly, that it would be misunderstood for generations. That's not the issue. We can deal with austerity. We can deal with seriousness. The music isn't trying to be seriousness. You should listen to be serious. You should try the finale. I mean, it's marked Allegretto con spirito, when, which is absolutely, wishful thinking on Reger's part. This Allegro con spirito is Allegretto, pardon me, con spirito, is the most limp noodle of a piece you've ever heard in your life. I mean, it has a tune that sounds like really slow motion barroom honky tonk. And if you think that's amusing, knock yourself out. If you think that has spirit, knock yourself out. I mean, there have only been two really great recordings of that piece. This one, and of course the Serkin and Ormandy recording. A bunch of other pianists have tried it. I mean, Gerhard Opitz did it, Michael Korstic did it. My favorite is the one that was stuck in the giant Reger box on Berlin Classics, with Günter Herbig conducting the extremely Dickensianly named Amadeus Weberzinke, whose name is the most interesting thing about him when it comes to performance. He takes 11 and some odd minutes. I mean, Serkin gets through it in 8. This one is 9. The music is monochrome. It's incredibly dreary and monochrome. And, you know, there may be a market for that sort of thing. I don't know. It's tortured and overworked and really just unpleasant all the way through. And it has formal problems because both this piece and the Pfitzner, as you will see, have big, long first movements, 18 minutes, written in completely dysfunctional versions of sonata form. And by dysfunctional, I mean something very simple. You know, the idea behind sonata form is a tonally directed dramatic framework. But if you're going to write nothing but chromatic harmony, really seriously chromatic harmony, then the tonal element goes out the window. I mean, there's nothing directing the drama, so there's no drama. It's that simple. All you have is a piano noodling around and the orchestra accompanying with varying degrees of excessive richness. And, you know, you can actually compensate for the lack of tonal drama. You can do it by using an ostinato technique, as Benjamin Britten does, by adapting simpler forms, as so many composers did, such as, you know, turning concertos into sort of Baroque suite type things. All of that works, but Reger doesn't do any of that. Why? Because Brahms is his model, and he's going to follow Brahms's forms without understanding Brahms's technique, because Brahms understood tonal drama as few composers ever have. I mean, he understood what Mozart and the classical composers did with concerto form, and he was able to do the same thing for the same reasons, because the basis of his music is the same. Reger's basis is something else entirely. So the result is, let us make a list: a busy, overscored, monotonous, monochrome, lacking in melody, piece of junk. Basic, that's it for the Reger Piano Concerto. Now, if you want to hear it, you could certainly consider Hamelin's recording with Sirkin. It is excellent, and it comes with a wonderful Strauss burlesque. All of which leads us to Pfitzner, who, next to Reger, makes Reger sound like a masterpiece. Now, Pfitzner was a miserable, embittered composer who basically wrote miserable, embittered music. He is sort of the sonic equivalent of erectile dysfunction. I mean, that's sort of the way I hear Pfitzner. I mean, it is impotence elevated to an aesthetic principle. I mean, that's Pfitzner's music. I remember the first time I heard his masterpiece, the opera Palestrina. I mean, it's one of those philosophical operas. You know what I mean? Nothing happens. It's philosophical, except that Palestrina writes the Pope Marcellus Mass, and everyone's very happy. Well, the opera contains one good tune, and it isn't by Pfitzner. It's by Palestrina. It comes from the Pope Marcellus Mass. My good friend Bob Levine, who writes our opera reviews at classicstoday.com and who is absolutely the greatest genius that ever listened to the human voice, always described Palestrina as Parsifal without the laughs. And if you can imagine such a thing, that's Palestrina. And that's his best music. Make no mistake. Make no mistake. You know, Pfitzner was one of those, I mean, his dates were 1869 to 1949. You know, he survived the Second World War. He became a sort of enthusiastic Nazi supporter because, of course, he thought the Nazis would play his music because it was conservative and embittered and miserable. And they were conservative and embittered and miserable, so it was a match made in heaven, as it were. And, you know, his music consists entirely of inhibitions. It's nothing but a list of inhibitions. You know, he writes a concerto which can't be too virtuosic, can't be too melodic, can't be too, you know, it's all negatives. It's all things that it's not. It can't be advanced in harmony or technique. It has to all reflect the glorious German past. And the result is hopelessly anachronistic and really unpleasant and endless. It's just endless. What's so fascinating about this Pfitzner concerto is the movement titles. Let's talk about those, shall we? There are 4 movements, each one drearier than the one before, no matter what they're called. So the first movement is called Pomphaft. I'm not kidding. Pomphaft. Get it? Pompous. Mit Kraft und Schwung. You know, with force and verve. No, It's 17 minutes of aimless noodling and just it doesn't go anywhere for the same reason that Reger's doesn't, because its form and the content have nothing to do with each other. He just fills the old bottle with what he considered to be a more advanced version of something old, and the result was like new Coke. Remember how that didn't work at all? I mean, it was totally rejected. Why? Because there was nothing wrong with old Coke, so there was nothing to improve on, and his take on the old Coke was completely lame, and so it is here. Then we get the fun part. Oh God, it's called Heiterersatz, ziemlich schnell in einheitlich atemlosem, oh my God, atemlosem Zeitmaß. I mean, it's easier in English. Cheery piece, rather quick, in totally breathless tempo. I mean, who's he kidding? I mean, yeah, it's breathless, but it's also charmless. I mean, completely, totally charmless. It has no character at all. Then we get to the slow movement. Äußerst ruhig, versonnen, schwärmerisch. Ooh, schwärmerisch. You know what that means. Okay, so also completely peaceful, pensive, which of course isn't completely peaceful at all, and then schwärmerisch, which is gushing, wallowing, just oozing, and well, yeah, it oozes, but what it's oozing, you really don't want to know. Trust me when I tell you, you don't want to know. I mean, it's just this shapeless puddle of music. And finally, we get to Rasch, ungeschlacht, launig. Okay, Rasch, fast. That we know. Ungeschlacht, unslaughtered, which actually means sort of barbaric or primitive or raw. You know, I mean, if there was ever a composer who could never, ever do anything that was primitive or raw, it was Pfitzner. Never in a billion, trillion, zillion years. Talk about wishful thinking. I mean, you know, you might as well have called this movement Amadeus Weberzinke. You know what I mean? And then we get launig. Launig is sort of, well, it could be sort of moody, but it also can mean sort of jesting or you know, sort of scherzando in a sense. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The most interesting thing about this music are the tempo designations. I mean, the tempo designations, because the tempo designations tell us what he wants to do, and the music tells us how inept he is in attempting to do it, which is why these two piano concertos, and this one also is quite well performed by Marcus Becker with the Berlin Radio Symphony Orchestra under Konstantin Trinks, who was probably the only human being they could find willing to conduct the damn thing. And it's coupled, actually, with very interesting work by Walter Braunfels, who was a much better composer than Hans Pfitzner. Also conservative, also sometimes not too interesting, but he had a lot more character and personality. His Tag- und Nachtstücke, day and night pieces for orchestra with piano obbligato. So here, the lack of interest in the piano part is sort of justified by the intent of the work. In other words, Braunfels is more able to suit the content of the music to the concept, whereas both Reger and Pfitzner have no business attempting to write sort of classical concerto forms in their somewhat attenuated, post-classical, yet inhibited and cramped styles, because that's what they are. That's what they are. Like I said, it's music that consists entirely of fear and inhibition. And I hate fear and inhibition in music. I really do. Unless you're writing an opera and the character has fear and inhibition, then you can do it, all right? But in an orchestral piece like this, I mean, to write concertos that deliberately de-emphasize virtuosity, de-emphasize color, de-emphasize melody, you know, are completely formulaic in their approach to structure, attempt to be consistently deep and profound without the slightest shred of thought into how to accomplish that in the style in which the composers are working. The result is, as I said, the two most horrible German piano concertos that I have ever heard. Now, I'm sure there are so many more, and if we're lucky, Hyperion, in their fabulous romantic piano music series, will record those too, and I can't wait. I can't wait. I could be talking about, for example, the even more horrible Furtwängler, symphonic concerto, that he wrote, which, maybe they'll get around to that. Wouldn't that be something? Because that is a piece of, that does Pfitzner one better. It's even longer and duller and sludgier and even more inhibited and dysfunctional than even these pieces. So it just goes to show there's always a lower rung to which we can sink. There's no effective bottom. So I look forward to future releases in this epic series, showing us, among the many wonderful discoveries, and there have been innumerable discoveries in the 80 some odd volumes for this series, just why so many of these pieces also richly deserve the obscurity to which they were consigned by posterity. Thank you. We're going to keep on listening anyway, and we're going to sift the wheat from the chaff. Every so often, we got to talk about the chaff. So this was our chaff talk. Take care.